Coming up, polling has President Trump ahead in multiple swing states. This polling truly is a disruptor. Welcome back to Political Spirits. I'm your host, Franklin Rye. We still stand for the proposition that the left and the right should have a few drinks and talk. Compromise is not a requirement. If those discussions result in us changing or even abandoning our positions, that's fine. If they don't, that's fine too. We just need to talk to each other. In that way, we can unify through speech. And if the discussion becomes a bit heated, at the end of the night, we should still be able to split up the bar tab and be on our way. So what are we going to talk about this week? How can we not talk about Hunter Biden's laptop? Well, I am going to talk about it, but not just those emails. I'm going to put them in context with what we already know. You've no doubt heard plenty about Hunter Biden's emails on Fox News, not on the other networks, of course, but that's become par for the course. There are a few things about this that are guaranteed. The first is that there will be more coming from the New York Post. We've heard they have more, and they know what they have. They have a cash cow that will run from now until the election. They'll maximize the eyes on the New York Post website. They'll maximize the sales of the print edition, and they'll keep people online and in much of the media talking about the New York Post round the clock for at least 2 weeks, and potentially much longer. The story needs to be investigated, but on its face, it backs up the allegations that Hunter Biden was engaged in influence peddling, selling access to his father. As to that part, your response may be and should be, we already knew that. And you'd be right. When Joe Biden was named the point man for handling Ukraine in the Obama administration, and then shortly thereafter his son Hunter Biden was named to the board of directors of ethically challenged Ukrainian gas company Burisma, even though Hunter Biden had no experience in the oil and gas industry, had no particular knowledge regarding Ukraine, and didn't speak the Ukrainian language, and had a troubling history with drug addiction, including being thrown out of the Navy for cocaine use, it was an obvious conflict of interest. Hunter Biden was paid the princely sum of $50,000 to $83,000 per month for serving as a particularly underqualified, I would say unqualified member of the board of directors of a medium-sized gas company. But it's even worse than that. After his son was nominated to the board of Burisma, Joe Biden flew to Ukraine, and he told the president of Ukraine that his country would not receive $1 billion in U.S. loan guarantees unless they fired their lead prosecutor, Victor Shokin, and they had 6 hours to get it done, or Joe Biden was going to leave the country and they'd never get the $1 billion. So how do we know that happened? Incredibly, we know about it because Joe Biden bragged about it in front of a crowd on video. You've seen it. It's vintage Joe Biden playing the tough guy. The only thing that's missing is a reference to corn pop. And by the way, Burisma was the subject of an ethics investigation that had not been closed down at the time Joe Biden forced the firing. And Victor Shokin has advised investigative journalist John Solomon that he'd been prepping to question Hunter Biden about $3 million in fees that he and his partner Devin Archer had collected from Burisma. But there's more. Joe Biden flew with his son to China on Air Force Two, and Hunter Biden came home with a $1.5 billion investment in the business he was pitching from a Chinese bank. That business, by the way, would later invest in controversial enterprises, including a Chinese nuclear power company, which was charged with espionage for stealing United States nuclear secrets. That was the scandal. It's been out there for months, and most of the media has largely ignored it or accepted Joe Biden's ridiculous response to it. Biden's response? He claimed he didn't know about his son's overseas business dealings, that his son did nothing wrong, and that the allegations have been investigated and disproven. Joe Biden has also rejected the idea that his son's employment on the board of directors of a Ukrainian gas company accused of ethical violations doesn't constitute a conflict of interest when Joe Biden himself was named the point person to deal with Ukraine, and the main issue to address was corruption in Ukraine. Frankly, that's all the information you need to know that Joe Biden is corrupt. Nobody thinking rationally believes that your son being named to the board of directors of a company accused of misconduct, while at the same time you're in charge of cleaning up such misconduct in the foreign country in which the company is located, isn't a conflict of interest. Everybody knows it is. It's a conflict of interest on its face. Any voter that claims it isn't is deluding themselves. Any journalist who refuses to acknowledge it is in the tank for Joe Biden. And any politician who claims it isn't is either doing the same thing or wants to preserve the ability to do the same thing. So what exactly did emails from the Hunter Biden laptop, apparently obtained from a computer service company which Hunter didn't pay, purportedly thus resulting in the company obtaining ownership of the laptop and its contents, add to this scandal? Well, I'm not going to talk about the photos. Unless something more serious than illegal drug use is revealed, they don't interest me. What does interest me is emails showing Hunter Biden set up a meeting with a representative of Burisma with Joe Biden when Joe Biden was vice president, and the representative thanked Hunter Biden for setting it up and giving him time to talk with Joe Biden, which is completely contrary, of course, to the claims of Joe Biden that he knew nothing about his son's overseas business dealings. The campaign has acknowledged that such a meeting may have occurred. We should have known Joe Biden was lying, but this just makes it even more clear. The emails also show Hunter Biden discussing obtaining an interest in a Chinese company, including an interest he was to hold, quote, for the big guy, close quote. Fox News has advised that they've confirmed with someone on that email that it is legitimate and that the big guy is in fact Joe Biden. Now, that email is dated after Joe Biden left office, but there are purportedly emails regarding the transaction which are from before he left. We'll see. But regardless, the man trying to become president of the United States using his son to engage in such a transaction with a Chinese enterprise, our chief global adversary, is something we need to understand. There's another email, by the way, where Hunter Biden is complaining about having to support the Biden family and casting himself in a positive light because he doesn't take, quote, half your salary, close quote, like Pop, close quote, does. For that one, Fox News hasn't advised that they've obtained a confirmation of its authenticity. But I should note that the Biden campaign has not asserted that the laptop is not Hunter Biden's, and they've not specifically disputed the authenticity of the emails. If, in fact, Joe Biden had a practice of taking half the earnings of his family members, and his family members were engaged in influence peddling, it really looks like Joe Biden was selling his public office to foreign interests. If that can be proven, not only does he have no business being president or holding any public office for that matter, but he belongs in jail. So are the emails legitimate? Well, I would point to a couple of things. First of all, the Biden campaign is not denying that the meeting between the Burisma representative and Joe Biden may have occurred. They've simply noted that there's no such meeting in Joe Biden's calendar. I ask you whether you think Joe Biden would ever list such a meeting in his calendar. Doing so would undermine his ability to later say it never occurred. Moreover, the Biden campaign isn't denying that the laptop hard drive containing the emails belongs to Hunter Biden. They're not denying that Hunter Biden dropped off the laptop at a repair shop to have it repaired because of water damage. I, for one, can't wait to see what's yet to come from the New York Post. Next topic. The Caddyshack election. Well, if you've been listening to this podcast for a while, you know that I like to make pop culture references, and I sometimes draw analogies between what's happening politically and what's happened in a classic TV show or movie. Most recently, I drew an analogy to a classic episode of Seinfeld. As I look at the intensity of the hatred of President Trump coming from the left, huge numbers of Democrats, and some traditional establishment Republicans, another pop culture analogy comes to mind. Now, they can try to frame their hatred as based on policy differences, but the reality of it is that much of their anger, much of their hatred, the thing that ramps up the intensity of their reaction is not Donald Trump's policies. It's his personality, the in-your-face attitude, the bluntness, the brash businessman from Queens acting like, well, a brash businessman from Queens. And in so doing, enraging establishment Republicans who simply can't accept the conversion of the party to one focused on the middle class, even if that focus is fulfilled in significant part through tax cuts which benefit businesses that employ Americans. And enraging left-wing Democrats who refuse to accept the politician challenging their sacred cows like climate change treaties which make no economic sense and politically correct indoctrination in colleges and government workplaces. The refusal to just accept the purported omnipotent authority of the entrenched bureaucrats, whether they be in the State Department, the military brass, the intelligence agencies, or other government agencies. The refusal to run headlong into the next potential military conflict, thus enraging establishment politicians of both parties and their sponsors within industry. I've said before that Donald Trump has been a better president than I expected. I voted for him and I predicted he would win in 2016. But I'll admit I had some doubts about how well he would perform. He has far exceeded my expectations. Before COVID, he had the economy roaring, and I expect him to bring it back to that point. And just as he said would be the case, when he got the economy roaring, the working class numbers improved the most. And the unemployment rate for blacks fell so low that it set records. And on foreign policy, he's been a revelation. He's shown none of the tendency of neocon Republicans and establishment Democrats to jump into new wars. He's done exactly what I wanted regarding new treaties. He's moved our embassy in Israel to Jerusalem, and he's facilitated multiple new peace treaties between Israel and the Gulf states. I didn't expect those new treaties, and one of the key reasons he's been able to do it, and no Democrat would have been able to do it, is that he's abandoned the foolish Democrat insistence on resolving the Palestinian issue as a prerequisite to such peace treaties. To give you some idea just how arrogant and disengaged from reality some purported experts on the Democrats' side can be, check out the video of former Secretary of State John Kerry on Twitter from 2016, where he explains that there will never, ever be a peace treaty between Arab states and Israel without resolving the Palestinian issue first. In his words, quote, "There will be no separate peace between Israel and the Arab world," close quote. Kerry continued, quote, "I want to make that very clear with all of you. I've heard several prominent politicians in Israel sometimes saying, well, the Arab world is in a different place now. We just have to reach out to them. We can work some things with the Arab world, and we'll deal with the Palestinians. No, 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 and no," close quote. Well, apparently the actual answer, with a competent president and Secretary of State in office, the answer is yes, 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 and yes. Compare the arrogant, foolish statements of John Kerry to what the Trump administration has been able to accomplish in the Middle East in the last couple of months alone. Now think about the fact that you're being asked to go to the ballot box and return the architects of the failures of the Obama administration to the State Department. How can that comparison fuel the anger of opponents of President Trump? For many, I don't think it does. For many, it's something more simplistic, something more shallow, and it's that motivation that fuels my pop culture reference. For many people, Donald Trump is just gauche. He's unsophisticated. Incredibly, they view the flashy billionaire who rose to President of the United States as beneath them. They describe him as not being presidential, but when I hear them say that about President Trump, I see them as Judge Smales from the movie Caddyshack, as brilliantly played by Ted Knight, looking down their noses at Al Cervic, as brilliantly played by Rodney Dangerfield. And the caddies who keep the golf game going at Bushwood Country Club are President Trump's base, scorned by Judge Smales and all of his fellow snobbish country club members. There are plenty of Trump opponents who perfectly fit the role of Judge Smales and his fellow snobs, but the ones for which the role seems tailor-made are the members of the government bureaucrat class, who just can't believe that Donald Trump won, and for many, he is now their boss. You saw them on full display during the sham impeachment. There's a famous scene in that movie that perfectly encapsulates what I describe. It's the moment when the caddies are allowed temporarily to swim in the club pool, much to the dismay of Judge Smale's stuck-up wife and her fellow snobs. Somebody inadvertently drops a Baby Ruth candy bar in the pool, and, you guessed it, in a few minutes a swimmer encounters it, mistakes it for something you'd never give a baby but a baby might give you, and the screaming, fainting, panic, and Category 5 level pool evacuation begins. That, in essence, is how much of the government bureaucracy, establishment Democrats, and some Republicans, news media, and academia see the Trump administration, like the proverbial turd in the pool of American government. I can just see them all standing beside the pool like Ted Knight as Judge Smales yelling to Bill Murray at the bottom of the drained pool, quote, "I want the entire pool scrubbed, sterilized, and disinfected," close quote. Bill Murray, in a full hazmat suit, finds the Baby Ruth, sniffs it, responds, "It's no big deal," and takes a bite out of it, and Judge Smale's wife promptly faints in reaction. That is how much of the Democrat opposition sees this election. They can't wait to drain, scrub, sterilize, and disinfect the pool because they think President Trump and his base are the equivalent of excrement floating in it. Well, I still stand by my prediction that this election is likely to turn out differently than so many of the polls and analysts are telling us. And if it turns out, as I think and hope it will, every Trump supporter should get a free Baby Ruth. And every Trump opponent who still spends their time looking down on the Trump base can just eat. Next topic. Polling disruptor. A couple of days ago, I was watching Fox News and Robert C. Cahaly appeared. He's the chief pollster for Trafalgar Polling, an organization which is often criticized for being too favorable to Republicans in its polling, but that criticism fails to acknowledge that it was unusually accurate in 2016. You've heard me say before, including earlier in this episode, that I believe Donald Trump will be elected president. I'm skeptical of the polls. I've pointed out that many times they've oversampled Democrats, but not all of them have. As I noted last week, the most recent Rasmussen polls have me concerned, but I'm sticking with my prediction, and on some episodes, I've gone into some of the specifics of state-by-state results that I expect. I've watched all sorts of interviews with pollsters over the years, but the one with Cahaly was a revelation in two respects. First of all, his predictions for the election are almost exactly the same as mine, state by state. Secondly, he raised an issue that I've never thought about. He said he's considered a polling industry disruptor because he rejects the way the polls are typically conducted. Most importantly, he rejects long polling sessions. He explains that few people have the time to go through a seemingly endless series of questions. In his view, if you're going to require a commitment of 15 minutes to answering polling questions, then the only people you're going to get answering the polls are the extremely politically active and people who have lots of time on their hands. Therefore, you're not getting a representative sampling of the population. He believes that dramatically shorter polling is the way to go. As to that second point, I'm not sure how you can disagree with it. Frankly, to me, the only open question is to what extent will the results, when your polling is effectively limited to the extremely politically active and those with lots of time on their hands, be different from a more representative sample. As to the first point, he said that in considering the likely results for the election, you should expect that President Trump will win the entire Southeast with the exception of Virginia, and that he'll win Arizona as well. He didn't really get into Ohio in detail, but frankly, Ohio is an even more likely win for President Trump than Florida. As he noted, that leaves the keys as Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. President Trump won Pennsylvania with Michigan and Wisconsin in 2016, and he came close in Minnesota. As to Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, so long as he wins the other states which he won in 2016, he'd have to lose all 3 of them to lose in 2020. And if he happened to win Minnesota, even losing Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin wouldn't be enough for him to lose this time around. And incidentally, the Trafalgar polling has President Trump ahead in multiple swing states. This polling truly is a disruptor. It doesn't agree with the bulk of the other polling companies. When I compare the Trafalgar results with the Gallup polling showing that 56% of those polled think they're better off now than they were 4 years ago, and the polling that shows that regardless of how they plan to vote themselves, most people polled believe that Donald Trump will win re-election, and the voter registration numbers showing that in swing states, Republicans have registered more new Republicans than Democrats have registered new Democrats, I think Trafalgar has it right, and I have it right as well when I project and predict a Trump win. If that changes between now and Election Day, you'll be among the first to hear it from me. And, as always, you'll hear from me next week. Please join me for the next episode and tell your friends to do so as well. And like the podcast on Facebook at Political Spirits, and follow me and the podcast on Twitter at Franklin Rye. And remember, all episodes are now on YouTube as well, and the YouTube channel is named Political Spirits Network. If you're watching on YouTube, be sure to like and subscribe and hit the notification bell, and select all after you hit the bell. This is Franklin Rye. Thank you for listening.